Hello and welcome to Damnable Delvings, where I delve into the damnable world of horror media. Today's episode is a nice little chilled out episode where I'm going to show you a few of the items that I've picked up recently. I recently went to some charity shops in Wales. I also went to a charity shop nearer to home, and I've also today, this very day, been to a book sale where I didn't expect to pick up very much, but was surprisingly pleased by what I did find. So without further ado, here's what I found today, and then we're going to go back a little bit and look at stuff that I picked up earlier. So the first thing that I picked up today, and this is my wife is a collector of vintage Virginia Andrews books, and what we have here is a slightly sad copy of If There Be Thorns by Virginia Andrews, but the one bonus it does have is it does have this absolutely gorgeous stepped back cover. The book is in a little bit worse for wear and does need a bit of tender loving care, but I did briefly work in a library for a while, so I am able to repair books a little bit to just make sure this cover doesn't fall off, because the back cover is a little bit loose. But it's a smashing little paperback. British edition would have been £1.65 when it originally came out in the long time ago years of 1981. So this book is over 40 years old, 43 years old this book is. So and this is one of the ones that was actually written by the original Virginia Andrews. As you know, a lot of Virginia Andrews books were later written by someone else, Andrew Needleman, if I remember correctly. To go along with that, we also managed to pick up some four books in the De Beers series. So we have Willow, which has a sort of fake stepped back cover, so probably a later one where they did a slightly cheaper printing. This one's from 2002. We have the second book in the series, Wicked Forest. These appear to be American publications. This one is a stepped back cover, actually. So look at that, very nice. As well as that, we have Twisted Roots, which is the third book in the series, which again has a sort of fake step back cover, which is what it would have already originally had, although it does have the step back cover art inside to show you what it would have looked like. And then this one, the fourth book in the series, Into the Woods, does have the cut cover, the step back cover with the art inside, and this little jagged edge running down there. So that's very nice. These are all from the early 2000s, and these will all have been written by Andrew Needleman. This edition is 2003, so they probably all came out around about the same time, probably republications of earlier books, as you can see. But they do seem to all be American editions, so someone clearly either picked up imports, or I don't know how they ended up in England, but here they are. Anyway, so there's those. While we're there, I picked up this nice little 79 issue of Lair by James Herbert. I've read almost all of The Fog by James Herbert. That's a joke no one is going to get. So Lair is the sequel to Rats. Rats is a classic novel that falls into the kind of paperbacks from hell variety. It's just, I love how late 1970s / early 80s this cover is. It's got that real gritty, grimy vibe to it. I've got some slightly more recent books as well. There's this The Birthing House by Christopher Ransom, who I've never heard of, but this looked quite interesting. When Conrad and Joe move into a Victorian house, it seems like a new start for them. With its fairy tale porch, wooden floorboards and perfect garden, it feels as though they have finally come home. But when Conrad is given an old photo album, he begins to discover what dark secrets the house is harbouring. Looking through the cracked 100-year-old pages, he finds a photo of a group of Victorian women standing outside his house. The women look scary, angry, all dressed in black with their arms folded. And then his heart nearly stops when he sees that one of the women, raven-haired and staring at him with hatred in her eyes, is his wife. Wow. Dare you to enter, it says inside. Now, when is this one from? I didn't actually check at the time. It's quite a recent one, 2008 this book is from, so it's about 16 years old. But it's got this nice sort of metallic silvery cover. published by Sphere, 50p. All the books I picked up today were 50p each, so can't complain about that. I also managed to pick up a couple of Richard Lehman's, The Cellar and Resurrection Dreams. Resurrection Dreams is a Star publication from, I think, 90s. But I'll just quickly check. Yeah, it's 89 actually, so it is a 1980s issue of Resurrection Dreams, and I think this one might be a little bit later because this one's published by Headline, Hodder Headline, and this is published in, there's quite a lot of, this particular edition is 1991 of a 1980 book. This author knows how to sock it to the reader, says the Times. So I don't think I've read this one either, so I don't think I've read either of them, so I look forward to having a go through those. I also picked up Elephantasm by Tanith Lee. 1, I really like Tanith Lee. 2, that title, the title alone is worth buying the books. A rural paradise overrun by the vengeance of the jungle. Elephantasm. Elephantasm. You just can't stop saying it. It sounds a little bit like it's historical sort of horror fantasy. 16-year-old Annie Ember lives in grinding poverty in the city until one day a mysterious shop she discovers a tiny and ancient ivory elephant. The subsequent murder of her sister's husband leaves Annie homeless, and she is found employment in a country house far away. Sir Hampton Smolt returned from India with a great fortune and also a dark obsession with that conquered land. His mansion is fanciful and extraordinary, like a Rajah's palace set down in green English parkland. Annie becomes a scullery maid in this strange place full of stuffed animals, eccentric servants, and the even more peculiar Smolt family. Soon she catches the eye of handsome Rupert and gradually succumbs to his advances, till one night she learns in disgust and horror just what his lovemaking entails. Annie's helpless fury then transforms this dream house into a whirlwind of panic and the impossible, letting in all the avenging power of the jungle and unlocking Hampton Smolt's darkest secrets. Elephantasm. Okay, that's great. As well, I've picked up a few sort of horror adjacent-y kind of things. I picked up the 3 books in the Knight's Mask series, The Alchemist of Souls, The Merchant of Dreams, and The Prince of Lies by Anne Lyle, which are sort of Elizabethan spy, urban fantasy novels. So yeah, Anne Lyle creates a world where history meets fantasy in the streets. No wilting fairy queens and tortured knights here. This is how historical fantasy gets dirty, said Douglas Hewlick, author of Among Thieves. Yeah, so this is, I think I've read the first book in this series actually a long time ago, published by Angry Robot. One of them appears to be a library edition, probably a former library edition. From the way it's it's from Lancashire County Library originally. I wonder how it ended up here. So I don't know is the answer to that question. We also have here some other sort of horror adjacent things. We've got Ray Bradbury, who covers the world of science fiction and fantasy. This is Dandelion Wine, which doesn't have a particularly horrific cover, but in the strange world of Greentown, Illinois, there was a junk man who saved lives, a pair of shoes that could make you run as fast as a deer, a human time machine, a wax witch that could tell real fortunes, a man who almost wrecked happiness by building a happiness machine, and there was a 12-year-old boy named Douglas Spaulding who found himself very much at home in this extraordinary world. So this is a lovely old edition of Dandelion Wine. Ray Bradbury is one of the greats of speculative fiction, so you can't leave anything by him behind. This is a 1957 book, but this edition was republished in 1972, so this book is 52 years old and looks pretty good considering. I love the sort of the funky 1970s cover, and the fact that this book was 30p when it came out originally in 1972. As well as that, we have this non-fiction book which was turned into a very fiction film. The Three Faces of Eve, which is a non-fiction book about a woman who had a multiple personality disorder. This is probably the oldest book that I've picked up today. This book is from 1960, and you know it's old because it was 3 and 6 originally, 3 shillings and 6pence, which in modern money is 31 pence, but in old money would have been 42 pence, because a shilling was 12 pence. So it's 12 and a half, 3.5 shillings basically. So it's about this woman who had 3 personalities in her one body. I don't know how true it is. I love how really 1950s this cover is. So that's a nice little book, and again, 50p for a book that is 64 years old is quite some going, isn't it, really? Also have this Robert R. McCammon, yeah, that's right. Gone South, part crime novel, part quest. McCammon creates a type of story all his own, said the Wall Street Journal. So McCammon wrote A Boy's Life, which was his first book that took him away from horror and towards a sort of Southern Gothic style, and this is a continuation of that sort of thing. So it's horror adjacent. McCammon wrote a lot of horror novels, but this is moving away a little bit from that. But this is a lovely book. Again, it appears to be an American edition. I always notice that American editions look, when you pick up an American book, they look older than they actually are, because you would have looked at this and thought maybe it was 80s, but it is early 90s book. What I love about the fact as well, it's from 1993, and on the back it does say, find us on the World Wide Web at www.simonsays.com. Is that accurate anymore? Who knows? But I'm amazed that in 1993 they were actually asking people to look for them on the internet. That's remarkable. I also have here this science fiction novel set in the crazy far future world of 2021. It's P.D. James's The Children of Men, which I believe she didn't really consider it to be a science fiction novel, but it's very a science fiction novel set in a future world where no one has children anymore. It's about a man discovering a pregnant woman who the whole world wants to get their hands on, unsurprisingly. It's a great book. It's an extraordinary film, so if you've not seen the film The Children of Men, I highly recommend it. One of the best sort of dystopian science fiction horror films. No, it's not a horror film. Dystopian science fiction films you'll ever see. And everybody in it is fantastic, but Michael Caine I'd say probably gives a career best performance in that film, so that's well worth watching. I also have some children's books that I picked up there. First of all, we have this edition of The Dark is Rising, a Puffin book. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's the second book in Susan Cooper's The Dark series, but this is the one that is really famous. They turned it into a film quite a few years ago, 2007 I believe, which didn't do terribly well. I think they were trying to launch another franchise to match Harry Potter, but they did not do so. This edition is from 1976, so this edition is 48 years old, but it has that glorious cover, and it's quite folk horror adjacent. As you know, I'm a big fan of folk horror, and it's just, yeah, I love this cover. I've always wanted to own a copy of this particular edition of The Dark is Rising, so yay, now I've got it, and only for 50p. I also have 2 Ursula K. Le Guin's, book 1 and 2 of the Earthsea saga, A Wizard of Earthsea and The Farthest Shore, in these lovely little penguin editions, puffin editions. This one was 35 pence. This one doesn't have an English price. Oh no, it does, 50 pence, this one. So that's lovely. Great illustrations on the back. I don't quite know what's going on with the tights and hawk body man on the front, but I'm assuming it's someone in the middle of a magical transformation. I hope so. I don't know if there is actually a hawky, leggy man in the book, but there we are. I also picked up in the fantasy genre two books. Fritz Leiber. Fritz Leiber is an enormously influential figure in the world of fantasy fiction, and I just love this. I love this cover. So I'm a big fan of sort of 1980s sword and sorcery novels, as well as horror novels, and I think there's a little bit of a crossover. It's book 6 in the Sword series, but I don't necessarily think you need to read all of them in order. This book is from 1977, so it's nearly 50 years old. Fritz Leiber was a huge influence on Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of people think that it was Tolkien, and Tolkien was a big influence, and I mean, there were obviously TSR did get sued, I believe, by the Tolkien estate over the use of the word hobbit, amongst other things. But in a lot of ways, the sort of daring do adventure of Fritz Leiber informed the world of Dungeons and Dragons a lot more than, say, Tolkien did. And there were Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser source books published for Dungeons and Dragons. So Fritz Leiber, one of the greats, who also wrote some horror stuff and sort of supernatural thrillers. There's one of his supernatural thrillers is called Night of the Eagle, the film they made of it. I can't remember. I'll put it along the bottom what the book was called and what the film was called. There's a brilliant film from the 1960s, which is a black and white film, which I think was released under the name Night of the Eagle and also under another name, which is fantastic, well worth seeing. And finally, from that particular place, I got hold of a fighting fantasy game book. It's a later edition than the ones I would have had when I was a child. I just love fighting fantasy. You can't go wrong with a little bit of fighting fantasy. And I lost most of my fighting fantasy books, so it's just nice to pick one up again. I would have preferred to have had one of the nice 1980s copies like I had. This is a much more recent edition from about 15 years ago, but it's still nice to have. So moving back in time now, I did pick up 3 books from a charity shop in Wales. I picked these up for £1.50. They were bound together with an elastic band. So I've got all 3 of them for £1.49 actually. They were the 15th Pan Book of Horror Stories, selected by Herbert Van Thal, with this gloriously icky cover. The 16th Pan Book of Horror Stories by Herbert Van Thal. Again, another gloriously horrid cover. And finally, the 22nd. It's a shame it wasn't the 17th, but this one does have, I think, the best cover of all, with this sort of burning, melting woman on the front. Herbert Van Thal is quite a well-known figure in the world of horror, particularly in the world of horror anthologies, as he published a lot of these, and edited them a lot. And these all date back a long time. I think these are all 1970s. So yes, this particular edition is from 1981. The 16th Pan Book of Horror is from 1975, so that's 49 years old, and this 15th Pan Book of Horror is probably 50 years old. Let me have a look. Yeah, 1974. They did come out roughly 1 or 2 a year. 12 sanity-shattering tales, each worth their weight in blood. Over 4 million copies sold of this world-famous series. Make sure your collection is complete. This was £1 when it originally came out 50 years ago. A whole English pound. I also picked up a couple of... we went to a horse sanctuary, which has a little charity shop with it, and I managed to pick up a couple of horror novels there. I picked up this copy of Lair by James Herbert, which is very nice. Unfortunately, I now realise, of course, that I picked up another copy of Lair, so I have 2 copies of Lair. This is a later edition. This one is from 1989, and it's one of the ones with a lovely picture of James Herbert on the back, looking all Garth Marenghi-ish, or vice versa, I suppose. So there's 2 copies of Lair. Don't really know what I'm going to do about that, but there we are, the two copies of that book. I also picked up this lovely edition of Sunglasses After Dark, which is in hardback, but does have that gloriously kind of paperbacks from hell cover. It was £1, I think. I believe I've read this now, and I really enjoyed it. It was a great read. I understand this was actually quite a big influence in the early days of urban fantasy. There hadn't been a lot of books like that at this point, so this is one of the earliest sort of modern urban fantasy novels. This is from 1990. It's one of the earliest books that Nancy Collins did. I think she was hugely influential on the sort of World of Darknessy kind of stuff. So that was a really good book. I'm really pleased I got hold of that one. I also managed to pick up a copy of this book, The Witch Mark, which which is a book about witches in Tudor England. And that's really all I know about it, because that's all I looked. I just loved the fact that it had this really nice 1970s cover of a witch. I love the fact the writing is so tiny, it's almost impossible to read on these old yellow pages. And I love the fact that there is no publication date inside it, so I have no idea when it came out, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say the 1970s. It looks very, very 1970s, and it's published by a publisher called Trojan, of whom I have never heard. It was £1.50 when it originally came out, which seems quite expensive for such a slim book, but maybe it was late 70s, so who knows. I've also picked up this copy of The Fog by James Herbert. I would have put in here a lovely little clip from I Am Not an Animal of Philip the Horse saying, "I've read almost all of The Fog by James Herbert," but I cannot find that clip anywhere, so I won't be doing that. So if you've seen I Am Not an Animal, you'll just have to imagine it. It's James Herbert. You know, you can't go wrong with James Herbert. The man is a master of British horror fiction, and sadly missed. And that's everything that I picked up in my last few visits to shops and places where one can find second-hand books. There's been a few purchases I'm really pleased about. I'm thrilled by those Pan books. I had a look on the internet after I picked them up and discovered that it was quite difficult to pick them up for under sort of £15 each second-hand online. They might be in slightly nicer condition than ones online, but that's still a great find to find them for £1.50, so 50p each basically in a charity shop, so can't complain about that. I really enjoyed the Sunglasses After Dark book, and I'll be looking for some more books by Nancy A. Collins, because that was a cracking read. Although I would say if you are thinking about reading it, maybe check out some trigger warnings, because there is some quite upsetting stuff in there, which again is the sort of thing that is similar with Richard Lehman. Although unlike Richard Lehman, I didn't get any sense of kind of, I don't know, there's something about Richard Lehman and the way he writes his books that whilst he presents certain acts as bad and scary, the way they crop up in every single one of his books makes you wonder if he did kind of enjoy writing them, whereas with Nancy A. Collins' books it does feel more like something that is a horrific thing, which is what it is. I don't want to go into detail obviously, because no one's here for that, but those are the books that I've picked up recently. I'll be keeping my eye out in future. They are having another book sale in about a month and a half, so I might go and have another look and see if I can find anything else interesting. They did have a massive box of Virginia Andrews books. My wife, like I say, my wife collects the Virginia Andrews books, so maybe there'll be some more of those when we go back again in the future, but particularly the ones with the step back covers is what we're looking for. So that has been my delve into the damnable world of second-hand book buying. Where am I going to put all these books? I have no idea. I'll just stack them up somewhere. That'll be great. And I'll try and get them read. Or maybe I'll just keep buying them and buying them and buying them until one day I'm crushed by a pile of unread books, and that will be the way I leave this world. And to be honest, that's not a terrible way to go. Thank you for joining me. Read weird fiction. Read horror fiction. Watch horror movies if you don't have time to read horror fiction, and best of all, and most important of all, stay creepy.